Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Synergies tier list video. Today our analyst will be ranking each synergy from S tier down to the D tier. Keep in mind that the meta will shift daily, so this tier list is not set in stone. With that said, let's get started off with the S tier. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, time to get back into the video, beginning with the S tier. This tier consists of Mech-Pilot, Infiltrator, and Cybernetics. Synergies in the S tier are dominant in the current meta and can consistently get top 3 placements. Up first in the S tier is Mech-Pilot. This trait with Infiltrator goes hand in hand, but Mech-Pilot is the core of the composition. Mech-Infiltrator as the super mech is insanely good. The core champions of Mech-Pilot are of course the only 3 available: Annie, Rumble, and Fizz. Your goal in playing this trait is to 3-star as many of these champions as you can, though it's most likely you're only going to get Annie and Rumble. Items for the super mech always lean towards the defensive side, such as Bramble Vest, Dragon's Claw, Warmogs, and Quicksilver. There has been a small meta shift in items for the super mech that utilizes Infinity Edge. Swords are already quite valuable for other parts of the mech infiltrator composition, and the super mech does enough damage on its own that you don't have to prioritize giving it extra damage. The next trait in the S tier is Infiltrator. As mentioned, this trait pairs with Mech-Pilot for one of the current strongest meta compositions, Mech-Infiltrator. While the super mech provides the front line, Infiltrator provides the damage carries. The core champions for this trait are Shaco, Kaisa, and either Kha'Zix or Echo. Fizz, of course, is also an Infiltrator, but he falls more on the side of the Mech-Pilot than he does Infiltrator. Both Shaco and Kaisa can be the primary carries in this build, it just depends on what items you find. If you have a lot of swords, then you will look to build items for Shaco with Bloodthirster, Infinity Edge, and Guardian Angel being the top 3. Utility and magic items will go well on Kaisa, with Seraphs and Morellonomicon being 2 of the best. If you're able to find a spatula or the item itself, a Demolitionist charge is fantastic for Kaisa, as it provides a second Demolitionist and makes the missile of her ultimate stun. Lastly, a great option for Infiltrator in other compositions is making Irelia an Infiltrator, as that gives her access to the enemy backline immediately. Overall, for this trait and Mech-Pilot, your goal is to 3-star at least Annie, Rumble, Shaco, and Kaisa. And the last trait in the S tier is Cybernetics. Cybernetics can be slightly hit or miss right now due to how popular they are. This makes hitting the units and upgrades a bit more difficult and can impact your placement in the game. That said, it's still one of the best traits at every single stage of the game. Early Cybernetics can win streak early, and since this composition can spike in power earlier than other builds, it can dominate both the mid and late game as well. The core champions are all 6 Cybernetics. Irelia is often the primary carry of this build, and Echo is necessary to find. This means that your goal is to level 8 quickly in order to find both Echo and Irelia too. Items can be flexible for this trait, though stacking Irelia with items is never a bad idea. Infinity Edge and Deathcap are both viable options for her. It just depends if there's a lot of Bramble Vests in the game, making Deathcap the better choice. Echo is best with on-hit items or AP items such as Static Shiv, Deathcap, and Morellonomicon. Red buff is the single best item on Lucian, and defensive items can be given to Leona and Vi. Alright, time to move on to the A tier. This tier consists of Brawler, Sorcerer, Star Guardian, Void, Protector, Blaster, and Mystic. Essentially, this tier is traits that are all consistently strong in the meta. Starting off the A tier, we have Brawler. Brawler is currently one of the best frontline options in the game and is played in several compositions. This trait is a bit limited in the amount of champions since it's only 4 total, those being Vi, Malphite, Cho'Gath, and Blitzcrank. That said, you're likely to see most of these champions played in several different builds, as well as played together, whether it's Void Brawler or Brawler Blaster. Because this trait gives health, it quickly makes for more consistent frontline, as high health targets can be difficult to kill quickly. On top of that, it has a lot of CC, with Vi, Cho'Gath, and Blitzcrank all having their own forms of crowd control. Next up is Sorcerer. Sorcerer really has risen this patch despite receiving no buffs, but due to other stronger meta traits being nerfed in 10.7, it's opened more viable options in the meta. Sorcerer can be paired with a number of builds such as Star Guardian Sorcerer, Void Brawler, or even Mech-Pilot. The versatility of this trait is why it's so high up on the list this week. Since we just mentioned this trait, next up is Star Guardian. Another somewhat surprising rise in this meta, this trait alongside Sorcerer has begun to really do well in the meta. It's another 3-star centric trait, as to do well with it, you need to at least Syndra 3 so it can be hit or miss. But it's consistent enough to do well in the current meta and can be a decent counter into some of the more popular builds like Mech-Infiltrator. Syndra, Nico, and Ahri are the most most important champions for this trait, so look to 3-star them when you play them. Syndra needs at least one Seraph to do well, and Nico needs a Guardian Angel. Continuing on down the list, we have Void. Likely the biggest surprise at 10.7 is the rise of the trait, considering how, well, not great it seemed in 10.6. With Gangplank and Rebels being played less, it's easier for squisher champions like Vel'Koz to do well, and with the discovery of how to position and itemize them, it's made this trait consistent and a viable option in the meta. The true damage really helps melt a lot of the current builds, which increases this trait's usefulness. How you want to position Vel'Koz is in the second row to the far right behind your front line, generally with Blitzcrank in front of them. Perfect items include Seraph, Quicksilver, and either Morellonomicon or Deathcap. On the lower side of A tier is Protector. The trait did quite well in the latter half of 10.6, but it had its ups and downs in 10.7. It's still a great synergy, especially because Xin Zhao and Rakan do so well together, but the 4 Protector composition can be countered. That said, it's still incredibly strong if you can get a Xin 3 and Rakan 3 with good items. Bramble Vest and Titan's Resolve make Xin Zhao a beast with Shojin and Morellonomicon on Rakan, providing a lot of utility. Next up in the A tier, we have Blaster. This trait has fallen off quite a bit in 10.7, but it's still a consistent trait for getting a top 4. The biggest reason why it's likely still viable is due to Brawler being quite strong in the current meta. Jinx is a good carry, but can be harder to make work in a lot of the current meta compositions. Overall, if the game is giving you a bunch of Blasters and Brawlers, it's always worth to try to play this trait, but just keep in mind that getting above a 3rd place may be difficult. The last trait in A tier is Mystic. Mystic continues to be in a weird place in 10.7, as having a team-wide magic resist buff is always useful, particularly in the late game since you can splash it in easily. Lulu is one of the best solo legendary champions in the game, but there's quite a few physical damage compositions that Mystic just really does nothing against. But then there's also some magic damage builds that it is good against. Overall, Mystic is worth investing in at level 8 or 9, mostly because of how easy it is to splash it in and because of the strength of Lulu. Let's move on to the B tier. This tier consists of Sniper, Valkyrie, Darkstar, Chrono, Celestial, Mana Reaver, Demolitionist, and Blademaster. Overall, this tier is about secondary synergies that are splashed in to assist the other synergies, but on their own aren't that great. Kicking off B tier is Sniper. Sniper is mostly here to buff Jhin, and that's about it. Because Ashe and Caitlyn aren't viable carry options and there's no other champions in this trait, it can be limiting to play. That said, it's an essential trait to give Jhin more damage. Next is a similar trait to Sniper, Valkyrie. Valkyrie is much like Sniper in that it's there to be splashed in at specific times. Kill carry is the most common time to play this trait, though it is fine to play for Kai'Sa in later levels of Mech Infiltrator composition. Basically, like Sniper, it's just a damage increase for your carry. It's useful, but limiting in where and when you can actually play it. Moving right along, we have Darkstar. Darkstar is in an interesting spot as the rework made the trait itself stronger while making it weaker for Jhin carry. It can be good, especially as most of the champions can be strong in the right situation, but it doesn't provide enough to be above the B tier. Both Jhin and Shaco can be played as a carry outside of Darkstar, so while a specific composition utilizing the trait can do well, the trait itself is not really that impactful most of the time. Up next is Chrono. Chrono is fantastic as a support trait for many different builds, but there's never really a case where it's the focal point of a composition. It's useful, very useful, but it doesn't have a lot of power on its own. Look to play 2 or 4 Chrono in builds using an auto attack carry to give them just a bit more power. Similar to Chrono, up next we have Celestial. Celestial is also a great support trait for quite a few builds, but it's just not enough on its own. Even 4 Celestials can be hard to truly fit into a lot of builds, so you're most likely just going to run it as a 2-piece trait. It's still quite useful and provides a lot, but it's just a support splash trait, and that is it. Let's talk about Mana Reaver. Mana Reaver was reworked in 10.7, and it's much better now, but it's another support trait and a more niche one at that. If you're playing Aurelia, it's absolutely amazing, and outside of that, you're unlikely to play it. Overall, it's just super good in the right circumstance. Another niche trait is Demolitionist. This synergy fell from grace after the nerfs to Rebels and Gangplank, but it's still great in certain situations. Gangplank can still be playable, so it's useful there, but it's mainly seen in Mech Infiltrator. Even more specifically, it's played when you turn Kai'Sa into a Demolitionist. Outside of that build and scenario, you're unlikely to see a lot of Demolitionists. Lastly, we have Blademaster. Blademaster seems like it's on the cusp of being a great 6-piece trait, but it's not quite there yet. As it stands, it's currently played just as a happenstance, since a lot of champions that are Blademaster are generally played together like Kale and Aurelia. Early game, it can be good with Xayah carry, and it does buff your late game carries, but it's just kinda there and not really the highlight of any composition. Time to get in to the C tier. This tier consists of Vanguard, Space Pirate, Mercenary, and Rebel. In general, this tier is about the traits that can be viable but aren't consistent enough to be played often. Starting it off, we have Vanguard. Vanguard is useful because having a frontline is great, but outside of Jin carry, it's not really played that much. What's unfortunate is a lot of the champions that are Vanguards are quite strong, like Mordekaiser and Jace, but it's difficult to put this trait in at the moment. Maybe if they add another Vanguard or buff Wukong, it'll be a little bit more versatile, but at the moment, it's just on the lacking side. Moving along, we have Space Pirate. Space Pirate is an amazing early game trait to be sure, but it falls off quite quickly after that. If there was an easier and more consistent way to play 4 Space Pirates in the mid game, the trait would be so much higher on the list, but as it stands, it's really only useful early on. Next up is Mercenary. This is basically the Gangplank and Misfortune trait. While both got nerfed to 10.7, they've definitely fallen quite hard, though Misfortune is still played a decent amount. It's still less likely to see these two prioritized as the main carry anymore. They can be good, but boy does it take a lot of gold to make them really carry hard. The last trait on the C tier is Rebel. Poor Rebels have really fallen on hard times, as they're really only viable past the early game if you really, and I mean really high roll. Early game, they're still viable with Ziggs being an okay item carry, but late game, especially with nerfs to Aurelion Soul, it's hard to get this synergy up to par with others late games. And finally, we have the D tier. This only has one trait, Starship. Basically, Aurelion Soul got hit really hard by the nerf to bat, and while he is playable in very rare situations, he's just overall not strong enough to contend with other late game champions. All right, folks, that is it for today's tier list video. While tier lists are useful, it's best to keep in mind that they fluctuate a lot over time due to the shifts in the meta, especially since set 3 is still quite new. Let us know in the comment section below which synergies you think should be higher or lower on the list. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.